All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork. Still 40 photographers on process and practice. That joke was so not funny and so subtle, no one's even going to know I made it. But anyway, I'm Sasha Wolf.
I thought you were holding for applause.
I was. That is so often the case in my life. There's a thing you can do if you wait long enough. You get at least nervous laughter. So
that's right. Nervous laughter will be the title of my memoir.
Oh, boy. Well, I'm Sasha Wolf, and that guy who always, thank God, cracks up, the man from New Jersey, Mr. Michael Chauvin Dalton. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Sasha.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Back in the classroom, and which always makes me happy, but especially in the spring when I get my returning students. So we already know each other, and it's just great. We hit the ground running. I
love when there's like spring semester, but it's like dead of winter. Anyway, I've always thought that was weird.
I know. Fall and spring. It's all we go, and it's mostly in winter.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple things. We have a great episode today. It's a conversation with the photographer Rahim Fortune, who I represent.
Yes.
And so it was really fun to sit down and record with Rahim. So before we get into today's episode, I just want to give a little bit of a mention of the following episode. I'm going to be talking with Dr. Kenneth Montague, who many of you probably don't know because he's not a famous artist, but he's an incredibly important collector. And he's put together a really remarkable collection, and Aperture has just published a book of part of the collection. And I'd love people to just sort of familiarize themselves a little bit leading up to the episode with Dr. Montague and what this is. So the book is called As We Rise, Photography from the Black Atlantic, Selections from the Wedge Collection. And it's described this way. As We Rise presents an exciting compilation of photographs from African diasporic culture with over 100 works by Black artists from Canada, the Caribbean, Great Britain, the United States, South America, as well as throughout the African continent. This volume provides a timely exploration of Black identity on both sides of the Atlantic. So Dr. Montague's collection is really famous to us art dealers. I've known Ken, I don't know him well, but I've sold him work in the past. Proud to have some of my artists' work in his collection. And his collection's extraordinary, from Carrie Mae Weems to Seydou Keita, Barclay L. Hendricks, Dina Lawson, Jamel Shabazz, on and on. There's some great essays in the book. It's a wonderful book, and I'm really looking forward to talking with Dr. Montague about how he started collecting and wound up with this collection that's now considered incredibly important.
Yeah.
So, okay, on to today's episode. So it was, I think, a really wonderful conversation. I will say that if folks are waiting for the moment where Rahim and I have a long conversation or a conversation about his really heralded book, I Can't Stand to See You Cry, don't hold your breath, because there's a lot already out there about that project. And I decided to take this opportunity to really introduce the audience to Rahim and let Rahim's story of how he sort of came to be where he is today be the real thread of this episode, because he's so self-taught, and his origin story I think is just really fascinating. So that's
Absolutely.
what we focus on.
Yeah. And I think it was a great decision because I didn't know it. I was fortunate that we were able to record all in person on this one. And I got to meet Rahim, and, I knew about his book, but I never met him, and I didn't know a lot about him. And wow, he's just so impressive in every way. And just this hunger for knowledge, and he's always looking and he's always reading, and he's just incredible.
Yep. Obviously you have to be extremely talented, but one other thing that really helps to get to where Rahim is and where he's going is to be dedicated to doing the amount of work to learn that he does. I think that's something that really becomes clear in this talk. I apologize ahead of time for my voice today, my voice during the recording. It's particularly bad right now. Don't know why, but I was joking to you before we started recording that I sound like I was, performing at like Webster Hall last night until 2 a.m. in some punk band where I was screaming a lot. Not the case, but anyway. Well, without further ado, Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure, and here is your conversation with Rahim Fortune.
Rahim Fortune, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. Great to have you here.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's great to see you. I think it's been a little over maybe like a month or so since we last got to see each other in person. So it's, great to see you again.
So for our listeners, we're recording in person, which we've only done once before in the history of the PhotoWork podcast. And not only am I sitting here with Rahim, which is awesome, but Michael Chauvin-Dalton's in the house.
Hey.
And I haven't seen Michael in over 2 years. So
I know. It was like a double take. Like, oh yeah, that's what we look like if we're in person without masks.
You. Anyway, so this is really exciting. So obviously, we start every podcast with a bio, and I'd really love you to just sort of let yours rip, air it out, because, so many of the guests that have been on have had sort of similar journeys, and yours is very different, and I think is going to be really interesting to people and useful. So anyway.
Yeah, so I guess the kind of abridged version.
No abridged.
Well, it's a very long story of how I got to photography. And so some of the key points of growing up, was born in Austin, Texas, and, mid-90s. Growing up there, a lot of, formative memories, having a much older brother who put me onto a lot of music. And so those memories are very much filled with a lot of like Texas hip hop culture, which is very formative to my interests and some of my influences. So growing up, becoming familiarized with like pop trunk culture, which I'm sure if you're not familiar with pop and trunk, and so there was this thing where people would pop their trunks and they would have words displayed in the trunk, and it would be like a message, and it's a part of a very particular car culture and hip hop, pop trunk wave. And so as a little kid, I was really obsessed with basketball and hip hop culture through my older brother, who was kind of like vetting me to be like this rapper and point guard at the same time at a very young age, picking me up from school and playing basketball, him making his own rap music. So that was a very early influence. And then in 3rd grade, so I have to imagine like this is like kindergarten, 1st grade, all really into this. I think in the kindergarten talent show, I played the drums, and then the 1st grade talent show, I rapped for all of my classmates. So I was always really interested because my father is a drummer, and so I have a lot of musical influences. I'm kind of, I remember a very early memory with my father was, since my prepubescent voice, he made me hit the falsetto for one of the songs and was like really making me harmonize with him, and I was like so embarrassed, just like singing in this high voice. But looking back, it was I was learning about harmony and things like that. So fast forward to 3rd grade. So as I said, all of this when I was very young. 3rd grade, I moved to Oklahoma where my mother's family was from, the Chickasaw Nation. And so this was a complete 180 change. Go from living outside of Austin, Texas, a major city where, my family had been for many years, my father had been for many years, to moving to this very rural, very monolithic place where everything is a bit the same. There's not much outside influence, and it's been this way for years. But I think as a kid, being in third grade, I was like, oh, wow, it looks fun to play out here. That's was my thinking at the time. So it wasn't too much of a shakeup, because I was also interested in the fact that now I lived on acreage, and, this was my family's land that was given to them, when they arrived at Oklahoma from Mississippi, which is, a part of the history of the Chickasaw people. They're not native to Oklahoma, but were moved to Oklahoma and given land allotments and new names. And that's kind of where that history starts in about 1860-ish, when my great grandfather, 5 times removed, gets there and gets this land, and it kind of starts this like other part of my family history. So really thrown into that, I lived in a single wide trailer that my great grandparents had lived in previously, but had passed away and not lived in for some time. So it was, precursor to my maybe interest in abandoned houses and, some of these things, because I really moved into an abandoned house that was covered in VHS tapes. There were handmade shelves on the walls that were covered in VHS tapes. And I guess near the end of my great grandparents' life, they started just filming everything on television and marking it, but also not filming the commercials. So it's very, very tedious. And so we would watch these tapes when we moved there as we're renovating the house. And then my mother fixed up this house, new carpet, new furniture. And there's actually a set of almost like panoramic disposable photos that she took of the interiors, which those photos are extremely haunting to look at now. So to see this kind of remaking of your life, post-divorce, these images that she took of the interior that, were documents and very descriptive of the making of a home for children.
And who was there? It was you and
me,
your mom
my sister,
and your sister.
Me, my mom, and my sister. My little sister, who is probably that's actually the only person that through my entire life has never had a period of absence.
Yep.
And she appears in both of my books.
Yep.
She's definitely very involved.
A constant.
Yeah, she actually was the person who pulled the shutter for the cover image of I Can't Stand to See You Cry. She kind of racked the focus for us. And
credit for sis.
I know. Yeah. I told her, I was like, hey, well, if you ever, you need work, I guess you could maybe say you've shot a couple photos, but you maybe don't want in on this, on this life. But she completely understands photography, and it's great. I love her to death. Yeah, so we're in Oklahoma, and we have horses and things like that. And my mother took a lot of photographs. But so I can, expand on that maybe later, because my time in Oklahoma would lead to my first serious body of work that I kind of started to understand how interested I really was in making photographs and what its purpose it served for me, what it allowed for me to do. So my mother passed away in 2007, and we moved back to Texas with my father. And so thrown back into the opposite spectrum of things. I go back to Texas, and now I'm in a city. I'm kind of this country kid. I had definitely become an Okie over those couple years. And so I get back to Texas, but my interest was at that time in skateboarding, which was something that I had already become fascinated with in Oklahoma, even though I had no paved roads, simply dirt roads. So I remember I had a small slab of concrete built that I would play basketball on and skateboard on. It was maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, and then the horses walked on it. So it was all crushed up.
You had to share.
And so it is, it was really, once I got to back to Texas, the blow of moving was lessened by, wow, now I'm in the country. It was kind of the reverse, like, wow, now I have concrete and can skate. And so skateboarding really served as something that I was just so interested in, and it really helped me to heal and have something to really be like, want to go out every day and progress at. And at that time, I also started playing music. My father still being a musician, he got me like my dream guitar for Christmas one year. And so I had guitar and skateboard, and that was just, normal like teenage boy stuff. So yeah, I mean, keep going. I get through high school, and then I start playing in bands, played in a couple of bands and went on a few tours playing music. And then during that time, I was making videos of our tours on an old compact VHS camera. And I think that was kind of when I started to get really into the idea of just making images and making, moving images. Get my first camera from a thrift store. I'm really just going through.
Please.
Okay, get my first camera at a thrift store that I was working at. It went on the tag day, so I got it for 99 cents. I waited out the 5 weeks where like the tag day, finally, it was the green tags, everything's 99 cents. I've told this story before, but I don't know why I didn't just, but that shows where I was at. I couldn't get it when it was 30. I had to wait till it was 99 cents. And then I got it, and I had no understanding of like camera settings. And I remember like trying to take pictures with it in the dark, and the shutter speed was automatic. So it was like staying open, and I'm like waving the camera around like it won't close like this, like no idea what I was doing. But I think maybe made a few photos that I liked. And yeah, that's really where my interest in photography started.
So how do you, there's still so much missing. How do you go from that to today?
Yes. So, I was working at kitchens in Texas, kind of like in my early 20s, my first years on my own. Music had slowed down for me. So I wasn't doing as much music. I was more just, that's the period where I started maybe just taking film photographs of friends and, very amateur, just snapshot things of just photographing friends at, a party or at the skate park or at my apartment. Then a job opened up at a local lab, and I saw that, and I was like, wow, I'm a line cook right now. Like developing film sounds like a really cool job. Like this would be incredible if I could get this. I think I went to like the interview in like a suit or something, like really like I have to make sure I get this job. And they call me back, and I get the position. And
by the way, it's sort of amazing because this couldn't have been that long ago, 10 years ago or
2015.
Yeah. I'm shocked there's still a lab.
In Texas, we got 2 labs in town in Austin. There's 2 labs that still operate. One is like old school Noritsu machines, and the other one is an actual dip and dunk lab. So they got 2 spots there, and there's a pretty big, demand for film processing. So I would go there and start learning about scanning film. But one of the local Austin residents, Eli Reed, would come in and was good friends with the owner of the camera store, because this is kind of like the store I worked at is kind of like the Texas version of B&H. They're one of the major camera stores. Like people like Dan Winters would come in, and people who were shooting in Austin at the time. So Eli Reed came in and needed to make some prints, and I ended up just kind of working with him, helping him out, because a lot of other people didn't have the patience for him, and I was really fascinated with the fact that he was there being this kind of legendary magnum photographer to just kind of be in this local lab making some color prints. I thought it was super cool. And so we started maybe hanging out for like a week, and I helped him get some prints for a grant proposal. It was, to me at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm being mentored by Eli Reed, but I'd probably have to remind him who I was, it was very impactful on me to just hear him talk about it and become more aware of photojournalism and fine art photography, documentary photography, really starting to understand it as a language, as something that had its own substantial history to it. And that was really my introduction to, I guess, the documentary vision, was through Eli Reed, meeting him. So, then I had someone tell me that the best photos that I was making were some of the photographs I was just making of my friends in a way that felt, I guess, honest or intimate. Some of just the other young men that I was around, someone, gave me a criticism that was some of the better images that they were seeing of everything that I was shooting. So I kind of started to focus in on that and taking early attempts at street portraiture in Austin. And so that's really where I started to form my voice as a photographer, was that. And then also learning, darkroom was big for me, because I was from the beginning fascinated with just the act of processing film, the kind of reward of it, of pulling the negatives out, and then in the morning they'll be ready to scan, and then after that you go shoot and you repeat, and that was really fun to me, and that was a big part of why I instantly gravitated towards making black and white photographs.
I mean, the material part of it I know is very important to you, and I relate to that. So, in some ways, when people switch to shooting digitally, it's harder for me to understand really just from that sort of standpoint, because the materiality, the touching of things, of film, of chemistry, of, all that is, to me, as it is, I know, to you, so much a part of the process that's engaging and interesting. Let me ask you, you had to have been really starting to look at work at this point. I mean, even when you just said sort of in passing that you're starting to take sort of street portraits, obviously you had to have been looking at things to even know what that is. So what are you looking at this point?
I think some of the early influences that I was seeing at the time was things that were just on the Magnum website. I would go and look at Eli Reed's work, and then it would be, you could see Martin Parr, and you could see Alex Soth, and then also a current of, photographers on Instagram, primarily an account called Street Etiquette, that was doing kind of this classic style portraiture and lifestyle photography of young people in Brooklyn. And there was a couple of short films that came out that were, at the time, it was almost like that scene was almost like a 60s revival, like the way that the people were dressing. There's artists like Leon Bridges, and there was very much this thing of like reclaiming of historical. And so that was also another current that was starting at that time.
Yep.
So those two things kind of married was also like, now the way that I was photographing my friends was maybe a little bit more informed, that I was, had gotten my first medium format camera and was processing my negatives and was looking at Eli Reed's work and was looking at Bruce Davidson's work and kind of understood. But I think with street portraits, it took a long time, and it's something that I'm still learning about my relationship to that. But I think at the beginning, it wasn't super informed. Maybe also like Renika Dijkstra or like, August Sanders tribute, kind of just try to put someone in the center of the frame and just think that it's going to make a good photo. And now I know that there's so much more that goes into saying something with the photograph, where maybe at that time it was about just learning how to approach people and make photographs of people that I didn't know. But I think that was, mostly what was informing those early attempts at making images.
So how did you go from that time to now? Like, how do you develop a career? Because you have a pretty solid career going now.
Well, so I moved to New York in 2017. I moved to New York during the summer, started going to BMCC Community College, and my interaction with the other students was really great because I was getting out of Texas. I was meeting all of these students who were actually a little bit younger than me. And it was just a real eye-opener to the condition of young people with like no adults around, because in Texas, I wasn't in school. So it was like the unity with other young people was maybe coming out of like other activities, like going to a concert or being at the skate park or something. And it was not... Going to school in the city was so much more just eye-opening to me. I guess it's the only way I can really describe it. And a few people that I met, but I actually made a few photographs while I was attending school. So I would bring my camera to school and make photographs of some of my classmates.
And what classes are you taking?
I mean, I was studying sociology, so I was just taking like basic math classes and had a few sociology courses.
So you're still not thinking at this point, I'm going to be a photographer?
Well, I was still wanted to be a photographer, but I wanted it to be from like a perspective of being more invested with human interaction and the ethics of like studying culture and human behavior, and the photos being not an afterthought, but being like a byproduct of a deeper connection with people. So that I was thinking more access, the photographs I can learn how to make, but the access and the not even want to say ethics, because I don't think that sociology program is going to necessarily give you your own moral compass, but that's what I was thinking with my choice to study sociology. And so that was really, really great. And then also I was living in Flatbush at the time. So was making some photographs in Flatbush, making some street portraits as well, and started making some photographs in New York as well. And so, fast forward a few years, I'm going to get to the point of how I got to here, because it is a long story, and some of those points, it's hard to understand without, some of these smaller things that happen.
You're a good storyteller. It's okay.
I tried to do even an editorial shoot at one point where the photos were just absolutely bad. I hate to say it, I'm sad, but it was bad, and it actually didn't make it into the magazine. And that was something that I had to deal with early too, of wow, I can't be mad at anybody. I actually didn't do that good, and I know what I was trying to do, but it didn't work. And I still, I think I learned a lot from that, because I still deal with that, with trying to actually figure out how to articulate certain ideas that I have. And so started to pitch some editorial jobs to people, and one of them that got picked up was through Suited magazine. And I did a feature on classical musicians in New York, 3 Black contemporary classical musicians who have practices both in the classic art form but also in a more experimental. And I just thought that was a very good kind of metaphor for what I was interested in photography, was this idea of classical, but how is it new? Why is it new? How is it important? Why do we need to think about it in juxtaposition to history? And so featuring these 3 up and coming, some of them are, actually really great. They've done some incredible things. And I also did the interview portion. So I did the writing. So it was, the first time in print in a magazine, it was Images and Words by Rahim Fortune. And so that was very important. And that was the first story where I started to shoot 4x5 on, and I think that it just showed that I was maybe maturing a little bit in maybe my vision, but also in the ability to make something concise, because with Instagram at the time, it's these one-off photographs where you're just sharing them and there's very little connection between them or being digested as a sequence or anything like that. And I think, and that really doesn't change. I mean, I make the mistake sometimes of showing a photo from something that I love that I shot on my phone, and the reaction is always the same. Of if I might as well just show them a meme, because that might get more of a just draw. It's not a good platform for seeing images. So some of the photographs that at this point, I'm already making photographs in Oklahoma, because also this is important to go back. When I went to New York, I realized how different where I grew up was. Whoa, that place has a lot of character that I never saw, because I was just, that's the post office, that's the lady on the porch, the things you see every day. So when I came to New York, I was wow, actually there's so much about where I'm from that's so interesting. And so I had never been back to Oklahoma since leaving in 2007. So 10 years later, I decided that I wanted to go back. And so at the time, I don't even think I was old enough to rent a car. I think my father rented a car for my sister and I drove out to Oklahoma to my grandmother's house for the first time to see where I grew up. And so that was such a life-changing experience. It's seeing something you haven't seen in a decade. You've only been alive for 2 decades, so there's not that much point of reference, but it's not new to you. It was really, really, flooring just to experience that. And I think the camera helped me to want to see more, where I might have continued to kind of guard my eyes from that, that part of my life. But the camera was really allowed me to feel something was coming from it, and there was something to show for it, and there was something to finally make it real, I guess.
Are you thinking that you might, if you hadn't had the camera, you might not have gotten as involved because it was sad, because your mom wasn't around anymore, and the camera sort of made the painful feelings somehow worth it? I mean, is that...
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, also up until just maybe in 2020, nobody from outside of my family had ever seen where I grew up. There was very little point of reference for this part of my life. If I explained it, you might not believe me. It's so far from what is normal that people can't really imagine it. So until you actually see what this town looks like, it was to be able to show parts of that, into, I don't know, I don't even want to say be proud of it, but like someone to see the photograph and be like, wow, that's really something. And to be like, yes, this is where I'm from. Like, this is a part of me, you know, that was, it was something that was, you know, felt empowering. And yeah, I don't think that I would have been as interested in revisiting some of these towns and driving past some of these places where family members used to work and where I used to go to school if I wasn't taking away something, you know, to show for it. But, you know, also going out there, seeing my grandmother, it was the complete opposite of the city. So, you know, if I was in New York for a period of time, going to Oklahoma was like the complete opposite, where your phone doesn't work. It's just completely like, if you ever wanted to go out off the grid and write a screenplay or something, like my grandma's house would be the like artist retreat. So it was, you know, pretty good for that too. And also it's like my grandma never got into internet culture. Like, she still reads catalogs and browses the TV guide, and the point of conversation is, you know, I would be sitting there and she'd be like, you know, if you ever make a garden, you got to plant black-eyed peas first, because they put the right minerals into the soil before you plant anything else, you know. And I'm just like, wow, that's great. And then she's like, you know, back just like this, all of these things. And she was also really inspirational, because she reads like a lot of Western and romance novels. So like, she doesn't necessarily speak as much about it, but I just know that she just has this deep understanding of like stories and narrative. And so she's, you know, that
genre fiction, the ultimate story. I mean, that's the thing about genre in writing, is it's always a narrative story first.
Yeah, so she was great to be able to visit with, and to get so much family history that I didn't have beforehand. I mean, dates, learning things. Being Chickasaw, you have to be able to prove your lineage, which is a whole other crazy thing. And so there is this big connection to knowing exactly like who your relatives are, what dates, because a lot of that stuff you have to be able to prove it to hold onto your land and to maintain tribal status. So I got a lot of information from her, and I think that it demystified some things for me. But yeah, that was happening at the same time that I'm doing this musician story I spoke of. And so having those two things come out, I think that my work was starting to get taken a little bit more serious. Yep. And then that kind of leads, you know, up until the year of the pandemic, where I complete the book I Can't Stand to See You Cry. Yep. And earlier in that year was when I self-published Oklahoma in 2 volumes. Really as a means of sustaining myself as an artist. I also planned to keep working on Oklahoma. And then when the pandemic hit, I needed to see the photos physically. And when I made like the mock-up book, I felt good enough about it. I was like, I think I want to put this out into the world. And yeah, I'm happy I did it, because I think that otherwise it would have been difficult for people to get a grasp on those photographs through like an online feature or something that wasn't physical or felt had some, you know, a finished quality to it.
So how do you understand when all of a sudden you start getting, you know, calls to shoot on assignment, and all of a sudden you seem to be quite popular? You know, how do you understand that at the time, and how do you experience it at the time?
So I was a photo assistant before for quite some time. So I had worked for people who were already doing it very well. And so I had a bit understanding of like, not all that glitters is gold. This is what rates look like. This is what working for a certain publications means, you know, good or bad. So I had some understanding of a little bit of to have some discernment of, you know, what was coming in, but it didn't happen, you know, really quickly. For example, I had some photographs in maybe 2019 that came out through Vogue of the Juneteenth parade in Austin. And that was absolutely so. I was so happy about that, you know, when that happened. And also so many people from the community were really excited about that, because to see our hometown parade on Vogue, you know, amazing. And to like, it was just really cool. It was, so that was also pre-pandemic. So that was one thing that had started. And as far as early assignments, I think during the pandemic, so much shifted, just as in narratives, because I, you know, before the pandemic, my work was not getting the same level of attention. And I was, you know, the work had matured, but there was less reliance during that time on kind of polished commercial imagery where, you know, it's about the celebrity and the colored backdrop, and there's like some element of like colored lighting, or it's very pastel. And it's like, these are the photos that I was lighting previously, and these photographers are working constantly. At this time, someone who can work on their own, you know, on the ground, one camera, and can like get in there and tell a story became really needed by the publications. And some people did it wrong. You know, some publications did things that got a lot of backlash, but it seems like everyone was trying to respond to that. Mm-hmm. So I worked on 2 pieces at that point, which was the New York Times Source of Self-Regard, mm-hmm. which was curated by Deborah Willis. And I ended up getting the cover image of that Sunday paper.
Yep.
And that was a really, really big accomplishment, because at this time, you know, my father is ill and I'm caregiving for him. And so I was in a very heightened emotional state.
Did your dad see that
He
cover?
did see that. Oh, absolutely. He saw that. He
must have been.
He saw the Oklahoma book be published.
Yeah.
He saw, because I mean, I was ordering maybe in boxes of like 75, and just they were sending them out. I think the first batch I sold them all through DM. Like it was very like, you know, out the trunk.
Yeah.
But so he was always like, wow, son, like what the hell? People like really want these books. And he's had, you know, he saw those photos, and it was probably painful for him to see it, to be like, wow, my son, like, you know, this is what he is thinking. But he was also moved by it, because I know he had a lot of sadness about my mother passing.
Yeah.
Maybe that seeing the book, you know, made it more concrete for him. But he was always really moved by the fact that I went back for that story. You know, he's like, wow, son, you went back, because I don't know, it could have been very easy to look the other way. And maybe there's a history of, you know, men not embracing or confronting these things that might haunt you for a life.
But he was an artist himself. So he had an artist's soul. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me get back on track. The Source of Self-Regard piece comes out, and the cover image was really important for me. I was so happy with the way that they edited that, and just graphically, it really was moving. And that is when Doug found out about my work, was through Doug Du Bois, for people who don't know who Doug is. But that piece comes out, Rolling Stone reaches out to me, and they asked me if I want to work on something. And they pretty much gave me free reins. They said, what story do you want to tell right now? And at the time, Austin was erupted with the protest, both for George Floyd, but also for Mike Brown, an unarmed black man who was killed in Austin. And so a lot of protests were happening. I had a friend who was struck by a non-lethal round and had to have like a limb-saving surgery. And so things were really heightened at this point. And I was, you know, my sister dealing with schools being shut down and all of her children being at home. So there was just all of these things kind of boiling on the surface that I thought were a bit more important to showcase, maybe, rather than like the protests, which I was seeing. It was like all of these photographers had been locked up for 6 months, and then the protest erupted, and it was like this great subject to go out and photograph. And I was really not interested in seeing it for multiple reasons, you know, protester safety and narrative, things like that. So I wanted to make something that was almost my response to those images, which would be much more softer and engaged, because we had been speaking about these issues so much prior to this moment. And so I wanted to almost have this piece be like, where are we at now realistically? And so these images, a lot of them which made it into the book, were, you know, photographs of friends expecting children during COVID, my father's health, my sister and her children, my friend recovering from his gunshot wound. And that piece ran in Rolling Stone, and I did a small film for it. And that's when things really started to pick up. And I think, you know, New York Times Magazine reached out and they asked me to do the COVID-19 story, you know, and then Time Magazine, I did a story in Rosewood, Florida, on the descendants of the Rosewood Massacre. And so a lot of things they started to come in at that point, but it was like, you know, such a slow, like, working up to it, that I think I was ready once it happened. And it was difficult to do some of those assignments, because I had to leave home, leave my father's side, taking care of him. But I think that, you know, he and I knew that it's what I had to do at that time. So that's really was the progression of things, you know, and that's where things, I guess, you know, you could say where I am now is that's.
Did you ever, because your work really is a throwback in a lot of ways. I have certain issues with even that descriptor because I've never really understood. This is a can of worms. I'll try not to open it all the way, but what I always say to artists I work with is that I'm not interested in them reinventing the wheel. I just want them to make a great wheel. However, in whatever voice is their authentic voice. So I've never been, preoccupied with what's new, what's, trends in art and whatnot. I understand the value in change and newness, but it's just not something personally that is seductive to me. But it is for most people, and it is can really mess with an artist's head. Shooting in the style that you shoot in, which again by a lot of people would be considered sort of a throwback, was that ever worrisome to you?
That's a great question. Let me think of the best way to answer that. The easy answer is no. It was never worrisome to me because I felt as though what I was doing wasn't necessarily a throwback, but maybe more traditional, which I don't think is necessarily a bad foundation of thinking about.
I agree.
Being rooted in
yes,
tradition.
I'm with you.
Because that is very broad. There is this idea of straight photography. It's a whole.
Well, I would boil it down to something even simpler, which is who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, who cares if you're making great work and it's moving people and it's beautifully executed?
Yes, but I think when I was really starting to do this, I'm also a huge history nerd. Just really just go on deep dives about so many things. I'm sure you've heard a few of my rants about random history that I'm just really invested in, but a lot of it centering around Central Texas and the history of Native people and the freedmen, and just really this, how did we get to the social and financial climate that is in Central Texas. And so I was thinking a lot about that history as well, and this idea of what we're able to participate in and be proud of. And so that's also was what was informing, I guess, some of the aesthetic, was thinking about like what has been, what could be of my actual surrounding, and it wasn't like I had a crazy subject to go work with. I wasn't like going and spending like 6 months in a foreign place or a city that I didn't know. It was like a deep reflection on where I grew up and what it looks like now. And I think that conversation is always evolving for me. And so with that, it evolves like aesthetic changes and aesthetic breakthrough. So I never felt like pinned down to a traditional style, but I have always been motivated by images that make me feel good or make me feel something that I want to like sit with. It's like you might listen to an album and there's that one song that completely speaks to you, and it's like maybe like nothing else from that band did that, and it's like a playlist. It's like images, they have different resonance for different things and points in your life, and I really enjoy spending time with images, and a lot of them tend to be older photographs.
I know we share a love of Milton Rogovan. That's when I knew we were going to get along.
Yes, I have a Milton Rogovan photo. It's not an actual print, it's just on printer paper, but it's on my fridge because I want to see it every single day. And like his unwavering love and commitment to people was so, astounding. Also his claim to only like reaching aesthetic perfection for the fact of legibility, political, purposes. And I just thought that is such an interesting take on why he became such a darkroom master. But I love all of those things that go into, what inform me on when I make a photograph. And, I really like for the people in my photos to enjoy how they look. That's also important to me. So I don't want to really be representing someone in a way that they don't feel comfortable being put into this thing. So it's not overtly historical or throwback in that sense, but it's just the medium of silver gelatin prints. But I eventually will start to make personal work in color, and I have the vision for that, and that will come much later. I still have fundamental questions about my technique and motives that need to be answered before I have the clarity to then focus on color too. And so when that story comes out, it might not feel as throwback, but I think that it will always, in a way, be rooted in tradition.
Breaking news, Rahim Fortune will be shooting more in color. So, most people are extremely impatient. And I don't want to break it down to generation because that just makes me sound really old. But for sure, we do see a lot of that. You don't have that. So, where does that come from? Do you have any idea of that? You're just extremely patient. And I think I'm bringing that up now in response to what you just said, because what you said was you have these thoughts about shooting in color, but that's far away because right now you still have a lot of work to do in black and white and a lot you want to express in black and white. And I know you, and I know that what you just said is true, that you're going to just sit in this pocket and that you don't feel urgency to get to the next thing just because you have an idea. Now, I know you have a lot of ideas, and these are things that you and I discuss, but you're still able to sort of sit in the pocket and get done what you need to get done. So is that just natural temperament, or is that something that you learned somewhere along the way? Because I think it's essential.
Well, it certainly wasn't always that way. I think it's come as a bit of a luxury of being, having a demand for your work will change that versus working to get recognized will change that dynamic and the urgency that you feel of I'm waiting on this next job to get booked. So I think that, it's been a bit of a luxury. I wish I could say that it was like this, I'm extremely meditated and though I try to be, but it's not coming from that place. It's coming more from a place of, after doing the book, doing a lot of press and really, I guess, seeing what that looks like. And there's good and bad things of like, finishing a project in that way, because I was able to see once the project is finished, what that feels like. And so I guess with my newer work, the patience comes from knowing the importance of when I do put something out or when I do finish something, that how I want that to feel and what I want that moment to be. I just recently went out of the country for the first time to Paris for the Paris Photo Festival. And just some of the people that are around, it's like, you have Raymond Meeks is here and, Todd Hito came and said hello. And I'm like, wow, luckily this work got me here. Like because it was really that project was so natural. And so I just want to make sure that whatever I make, I feel strongly enough to go back into that space with it. Yeah. So that's one part of it. Maybe not the best answer, but I think also the fact that I work a fair amount in the editorial world also helps to alleviate some of the pressure of putting something out, like my personal work out.
Yep.
So that also helps to build patience. But it also comes back to, like I said, like I really just am interested in making something that is of quality, but also actually articulates something that I'm working to say. And I think that the first, with I Can't Stand to See You Cry, that was so organic because it was my story. Where the second one, it's, the next project, thinking a little bit more of just a narrative that you're more crafting, more so than just photographing my immediate friends and family. So, I think that's the honest answer about this idea of patience and how, it does have to do with this idea of your demand and scarcity of jobs and, but I really think that you can ruin your work to some people by oversharing it. Yep. And, I've seen that. I've fallen victim to that. And it never really feels good. And it kind of gets back to the whole thing about photography should feel good for you. If it's really this stressful thing, it's with how many other things in life are stressful, this thing that I love so much, I don't want it to become my relationship to it. So you do have to be selective of how you navigate about it. If you've been into a situation where at first the opportunity seems great, but when it comes time to make the images, it doesn't feel good, that can really spoil your relationship to photography. So I'm very protective of me just remaining like joyful about it and happy about it, and it not becoming something that is going to cause me a bunch of anxiety because this person is doing this, or, I try to really avoid that pitfall.
Well, I mean, I can definitely speak to the fact that, you're really being honest here. And, my experience working with you is that you have a lot of ambivalence about, rightly so, in my opinion, but about where your work goes out into the world. Especially, I can't stand to see you cry because it's so personal. And I know for you, the idea of it sort of like winding up on people's walls that you don't know, and what if they're not a great person, or they don't understand the work, and it's just sort of they have it because you're the it guy right now, like that these things are sort of tormenting to you. And that's something that we've had to try and work through together. I mean, I totally understand that. But, I know that you are very, because a lot of the work you make is so personal, you are very self-protective. It's a tough position. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, that ambivalence about working with. So you and I started meeting many, many months ago and spending long periods of time together here, just talking and getting to know one another. And I think it's fair to say that, we really like each other and have a really warm and, connected relationship. But it wasn't that simple. I mean, I can talk, now or another time about what it was about your work that interested me, but because I'm talking to you, I think it'd be interesting to hear from you about your anxieties about deciding to work with an art dealer.
Yeah, so there's two things that really stand out about that question, and also just that time. There's two things that are kind of happened at once with me once you had shown interest that you wanted to work with me. So there's a couple things happening on the surface. One is last year I signed with a commercial agent, started working with a publisher. And so a couple of hands came into the pot, and you just kind of start to feel like, I don't know, almost like, you're a little bit like on the bidding block,
Yep.
And so that is not a good feeling. You feel like people are kind of just the institution has kind of come in to just take a part of you. And then also the other thing that's happening is when you get those things, you maybe have some very idealistic view of the art world where you're like, oh wow, I want to be signed with the biggest gallery, and I want to be having these expensive shows, and thinking that is what you want to do because you have no understanding of it, but you have been rewarded in such a way that you think naturally this is the progression in the next thing. But I think with meeting with you looked at my work in a way that other people hadn't, from other people that I had worked with. Though they were giving it a great amount of care, you, in our very first meetings, said things that I understood exactly what you were saying about the work, and made me realize like, wow, like all of this work has been cared for and vetted, but this is like a deeper level of looking at some of these things. And everything that you said, maybe to some artists might have been, I don't want to say crushing, but some people have a difficult time taking an honest criticism. And hearing some of your feedback about the work, it just showed to me that you had a really great understanding of how things were functioning and the possibility of things in a way that I hadn't before experienced. So it really, to me, almost added a level of clarity to something that felt a bit like mystified, of like, wow, just kind of swinging at the piñata and happened to hit, like now the blindfold was off. I understood a bit more about, an addition, and about, when you go to a museum and you see someone's work and it tells you like the dimensions and it is an object. I didn't fully understand that part of photography. And so it was great to speak with you, and I was like, wow, well, if I don't work with Sasha, like I'm out here in this cold world, like with just to figure all of these things out. And so, no, I really have enjoyed working together, and to have someone who thinks about photography in such a similar way. because it is an extremely like vulnerable and
very
drawn
vulnerable.
out process of figuring things out. And often from the outside, it just seems like these artists just have everything figured out and they're just churning out like these incredible projects and these concepts by themselves. But yeah, it was, great just to be in a conversation with you who had a deeper pool of knowledge, and also my experience with going to the photo festival and, constantly just new experiences around the medium that opened my eyes to different possibilities.
Earlier, you said something, I think it was when you were talking about that assignment where you were shooting those classical musicians. You said something about they were making classical music and they were also doing experimental music, and about it's important to, try and figure out how is something important. And I wonder, how do you know if something's important? I mean, how do you, when you look at your work, because I don't want to say how do you know that, because my guess is you don't know it for a fact, but how do you think about it? What gives you the confidence to say, at the very least, I think it's important?
Yes, it's. I think something that's really pivotal to that process is having a stance on things. It's like not being like anything that comes in is okay, but also not feeling like everything is okay, but knowing why it's not okay, and that might be an aesthetic choice, a lighting technique, that could be of various numbers, but having a stance on what it is that you want, why you want it, and to be able to look at some of your work and say, that's not it because this, in, looking at other images and really finding the qualities about them. That's something I constantly do. Like I'll look at all of an artist who I really admired, their best work, and I'll start to figure out certain indicators of what they were doing. Like, oh wow, they would often do this with their, portraits, or oh wow, they would often do this. And then there's some artists who it completely mystifies me. I'm like, oh wow, like I have no idea how they're creating this.
Right.
But about it being important just goes back to that. It's more about, well, I can't really claim for it to be important because I'm not out here trying to like teach the world anything. It's more my own self-exploration.
Right.
And like I said, caring about how I'm representing something, and also being very much in conversation with the people that I'm working with. If I make a photograph for someone in Texas, often I'll bring them back a print, and then the photograph ends up on Facebook or on a wall inside their house, and it has a separate life. And I know some photographers would be like, okay, this is for this book project, don't share it anywhere. And I'm like, I actually don't mind if it circulates in this other format. And that kind of continued conversation with the people that I'm photographing, the fact that they're a little bit more aware of like what it is that I'm doing, that's a bit of where the like idea, I guess, of, I don't really want to say importance, but but a certain like, honesty to the images. Yeah. And I don't think that for every project is that necessary, because it's always just about what your opinion is for that, or your, intentions are for that particular project. But one of the things that I'm really drawn to is, especially if I'm doing street portraiture, it's who am I photographing? Why am I photographing them? And knowing like that is really important. Yeah. And then having those continued conversations with people. And there's definitely something, like I'll see a certain quality that I, maybe see in myself or really enjoy about the person, and then speak to them about that. And then there's kind of this like mutual recognition where they're like, oh, wow. And then they maybe are interested in the camera, that, it's always this kind of mutual interest, not really like pressuring anybody. It's always like a real free thing. And it's very different photographing in Texas versus photographing in New York, and it's a completely different style of how you interact with people. Here it's like you could go to a busy street in Midtown and probably just chop it up with, a bunch of people. But in Texas, we don't really have, especially during COVID, we don't really have places where people congregate like that. So you really have to be on the road. You have to do it completely. And so that inherently changes the conversation. But I would never stop someone to photograph them and not be able to explain to them why. Like, why am I interested in making this?
I mean, I know you're very, you have a certain amount of suspicion of other photographers' motives, rightly so. And so one thing that I've always found really admirable about you is you apply that same suspicion to yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Looking at how I'm photographing people, if there's any like subconscious like reoccurrences and things like that completely, but not to the point of like detriment to where I'm like out in the world, like mind flooded with theory. And I'm like, oh my.
No, once you're out, you're working. No, I know that. So, I mean, I feel like we probably are at time, even though I could talk to you forever, but the good thing is I do get to talk to you forever. Sorry for everyone else out there who doesn't get to talk to him all the time, because it's a real joy. Well, I mean, I'll just say, because I think it's important specifically for the audience that listens to this podcast, why I wanted to work with you. You know, obviously people who do what I do for a living get varying degrees of asks. I am at the point in my career where maybe not obviously, but I get, you know, just a huge amount of submissions. And I see a lot of work that is really good. And I'm introduced to a lot of artists by colleagues of mine, people making suggestions, and the work's great. So there are people out there, you know, making really wonderful work. I have a hard cap on how many people I represent because it's, you know, one person, and it's important to me to be as available as I possibly can be to my artists. And as you are learning, I spend a lot of time with the artists I represent. So, you know, aside from the fact that it's really important to like someone personally because you're going to be around them a lot, these qualities that we've talked about today are those things that I look for. So not feeling the need to reinvent the wheel, which I've witnessed in many artists, can literally kill their creative process because you start focusing on absolutely the wrong thing. Your confidence in sticking with your vision, your absolutely uncynical nature, which we haven't talked about. I haven't named that yet, but I'm sure people listening have figured that out. And it's funny because I think, not last episode, but the one before that, Michael and I did a little just 10-minute happy holidays. And I read something that Robert Adams wrote. And I'm so tempted, I'm not going to do it, but I'm so tempted to read it again because you have basically talked in this way that exemplifies this way of being an artist in the world, which is an open-heartedness, an interest in seeing things no matter the circumstance and figuring out how to make maybe the ordinary precious and give it a certain dignity, and all the while be continuing to push yourself to learn. And when you push yourself to learn, because you are, whenever I see you, you arrive with a million new things you've been looking at that you want to talk about, which is incredible. You're always way ahead of me. But what that says to me is that you know you don't know everything. And so that sort of humble willingness to keep growing and getting better is very unusual, in my opinion. So from my point of view, it's just a complete thrill, an honor to work with you. So why don't we end on that note? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Sasha.
Thanks for hanging with me. And I'll just tell the audience that when we wrap here, you and I are going to go in the other room and do some editing. So
no, thank you so much. I hope that people enjoy the conversation and get inspired to just go out there and make some photographs and have fun.
I second that. Okay, Rahim, thank you again. And all right, bye, everyone.
All right, goodbye.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. You can hear PhotoWork on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, and be sure to subscribe on any one of those services or wherever you listen to podcasts.